Okay, so today we're going to start off with a very quick review of what we have already seen in the previous lecture. So if you remember, we've talked about 4 different types of elasticity. So let's start with the first one that we saw, which was price elasticity of demand. And so price elasticity of demand, if you remember, is always negative, because if you remember the formula, or if you remember the law of demand, it basically tells us that price and the quantity demanded of a good are always moving in opposite directions. When one is increasing, the other is decreasing, and vice versa. So it's always negative. Now there are different values that a PED can take on. So let's go through them one by one. So if PED is less than -1, we say that demand is elastic. Or actually, no, let's start with, let me just erase this. Let's start with PED is infinity. This basically is called perfectly elastic, negative infinity. And this basically means that even the smallest change in the price level will lead to demand falling to absolutely zero, which means price must stay at the level at which it is right now. If it goes up even by a little, there will be no demand left. After this, of course, we have PED, which is less than -1. So for all values of PED less than -1 to minus infinity, we have elastic demand. Elastic demand basically means that if price change by 1%, quantity demand will change by more than 1% in the other direction. So a 1% increase in price leads to, for example, a 2% decrease in quantity demanded, vice versa. Then we saw that PED can be equal to -1, which is known as unit elastic. What this means is that basically a 1% change in price will lead to a 1% change in quantity demanded. And then finally, what we saw is that PED is less than -1, but more than 0. And if that is the case, we have something called an inelastic demand. What this means is that if there is a 1% change in price, there is a less than 1% change in quantity demanded. So suppose that price changed by 20%, and as a result, quantity demanded changed by 15%. So less than an equivalent change. And the fifth thing that we saw was that PED is equal to 0. And this is known as perfectly inelastic demand. What this means is that effectively the quantity demanded is fixed. Regardless of what happens to the price level, quantity demanded will stay at the same level. So that's it for PED. After this, we took a look at income elasticity of demand. Now, unlike PED, there is no restrictions on income elasticity. So for example, PED can only be negative, or it can be 0. So it can't be a positive number. For income elasticity, can be both positive and negative. So if YD is between the values of less than -1, what we have is elastic inferior. Okay, so two things here. First of all, we have elasticity, elastic demand, and second, we have inferior. What does that mean? The fact that it is inferior good comes from the fact that the value is is negative. Being negative means that when income goes up, demand for this goes down, or vice versa. And you all know that if a rise in income leads to a fall in quantity demanded, we have uh, an inferior good. So that's why this is inferior. It's elastic because the value is less than -1, which means that if income increases by 1%, demand for the good will fall by more than 1%. If YD, however, uh, is more than 0, but less than -1, then we have inelastic inferior. And I'm sure you guys can work out why this is inelastic inferior, so I'm just going to not spend too much time on it. Then we have YED is equal to 0. YED being 0 means that the demand for this good is not related to your income. You are going to be consuming this good no matter what your income level is. So let's just say this has no relation. Now we move into the positive part. So YED, no, actually I think I wrote this down wrong. So YD is less than 0, but more than -1. Okay, so some of you must have noticed that I had made a mistake. And if YD is more than 0, but less than -1, we have inelastic normal. Normal, by normal, I mean that this is a normal good. What am I doing? This is +1, of course. Okay, so normal means that we have a normal good. The definition for a normal good is demand increasing when income increases. And if YD is between 0 and 1, we suggest that if income increase by, let's say, 5%, demand for the good will increase by, let's say, 3% or 4%. So that's why it's inelastic, and that's why it's normal. And finally, if we have a case where YED is more than 1, we have elastic normal. So hopefully, once again, you guys can figure out why this is elastic, why this is normal. So we're going to move on to the next bit, which is cross elasticity of demand. And so for cross elasticity as well, we have 5 separate places, 5 separate values. So let's start with XCD less than -1. If XCD is less than -1, what we have is elastic substitute. So this is substitute because what a negative value of cross elasticity suggests is that if price of good one goes up, the quantity demanded of, oh, actually, no, that is wrong. Making a lot of mistakes today. So this is elastic complement. So a negative value of cross elasticity of demand suggests that if the price of good one goes up, the quantity demanded of good B will go down. So if one good is becoming more expensive and as a result, demand of the other good is falling, what we know is that they are complement goods. For example, shoes and socks. If shoes become more expensive, the demand for socks will fall. If we have XCD more than -1 but less than 0, we have inelastic complements. And hopefully, once again, you guys can figure out why it is inelastic. If XCD is equal to 0, once again, we have no relation between the goods. So a change in price of good A leads to no change in the demand of good B. So obviously, there's no relationship between the goods. If XCD is more than 0, but less than 1, what we have is inelastic substitute. And if XCD is more than 1, we have elastic substitute. Now, of course, I'm assuming you guys can figure out why one is elastic and why one is inelastic. Should be pretty straightforward. The reason these two are substitute is because the value of XCD is positive. So that means that an increase in price of good 1 leads to an increase in demand of good B. So think of Coke and Pepsi. If Coke becomes more expensive, people will start buying more Pepsi. So increase in price of one is leading to an increase in demand of the other good. That's why these are substitute goods. Okay, so now there are a few extreme cases that I had not talked about. Okay, so let's cover them now. If XED is negative infinity, then what we have is perfect complements. So complement goods are goods that are generally used together. So for an example, we have shoes and socks. And so we'd expect the demand for these goods to move together. When you're buying more shoes, you're buying more socks. But these are not perfect complements. Sometimes you wear shoes without socks. Sometimes you wear socks without shoes. However, perfect complements implies that these goods must always be used together. Okay. So for example, your left shoe and your right shoe. If you're buying 5 left shoes, you have to buy 5 right shoes as well. It doesn't make sense for you to buy one without the other. So these are perfect complements. Another example may be a student's ID card. So if you are enrolling in a university, you are also acquiring an ID card. So the number of enrollments in a university and the number of active ID cards must always be the same. So these are perfect complements. I mean, I understand. I mean, sometimes not everyone follows the rules and the numbers may not exactly match up, but theoretically, they're supposed to be the exact same thing. And if XCD is positive infinity, then we have perfect substitutes. So what are perfect substitutes? I think so. I used an example of vegetable sellers in the last lecture. So similarly, suppose there are two fishmongers. They're selling fish out on the street on the footpath. We see such examples often in Dhaka. And suppose they're selling the same fish caught from the same river. And so they both have to charge the same price, because if anyone tries to charge more than the other person, his demand the demand for his good will fall to zero. Everyone will just buy from the other person. So these are examples of perfect substitutes. Consumers, the buyers, really do not care about which good they have, whether they buy from person A or person B. It is completely, uh, not important to the decision making. You guys can also think of, suppose a course that you're trying to enroll for has two sections. Both sections are on the same time, and both sections have not announced who the instructor is going to be. So it's TBA, to be announced. So two sections, same course, same time. You do not know who the instructor is going to be. So you don't really care about which course, which one of these two courses you enroll for. They're perfect substitutes. You'll take either one. Okay. So that was an example of cross elasticity. And now we move on to uh, the last one, price elasticity of supply. And so price elasticity of supply has a restriction, just like PED is always negative due to the law of demand. PES is always positive due to the law of supply. Price and quantity supplied always moves in the same direction. They're always increasing or they're always decreasing. So let's start with, suppose PES equals to 0. So this is an example of perfectly inelastic. That means that regardless of what happens to the price level, supply is fixed. Supply will not change at all. Then we have PES more than 0, but less than 1. This, of course, a lot of you should be able to say already, is inelastic. If PES equal to 0, then we have unit elastic. I'm going really quickly through this because by now you all should be able to understand how this works. And what else? If PES is more than 1, we have an elastic supply, which effectively means that if price increased by 1%, supply will increase by more than 1%. And if we have PES equals to positive infinity, that means that we have perfectly elastic supply, which means that even if there is a very small change in the price level, the quantity that is supplied will fall to 0. So that is it for the review. And so now I suppose we can move on to the new material for today's lecture.